Well, one thing that really struck me about the presentations was the point that Tim makes, that Portland is a different type of city from Houston. I guess the starting point of this discussion is, are we really giving people the information that they need to make the decision? And I would like to hear both of you on this. I mean, are we giving people the information we need? I think that's really what's that question here.
I wish I hadn't put Portland on the slide, because it makes it sound like it's because Portland wanted to be different. I think the key point I would make here is there's a significant piece of information that's left out of the Urban Mobility Report, and I'll pick the Portland-Nashville slide that I showed you at the end of my presentation. According to Tim's numbers, they have the same problem. I mean, not as measured by TTI, but total same number of hours of delay. And the travel time index is how they get the number of hours of delay. But in Nashville, folks spend 75 hours a year more traveling in the peak hour. Each person does. You won't find that number in the Urban Mobility Report. You can back it out of their numbers. Now, if you had an objective set of measures that reflected the performance of an urban transportation system, you'd say in Portland and Nashville, they have about the same amount of delay, if Tim's numbers are right. And folks in Nashville are ending up spending on top of that 75 hours a year more in traffic. Now, you may be right. They may want to choose to do that. But if we're presenting a report that purports to show how urban transportation systems function and how they compare to one another, it seems to me we ought to have both of those numbers in there.
And that's why we posted on our website last August 2 papers, one dealing with sustainable performance measures to try to identify some sustainability components, and a total travel time concept paper. If you go to our website, look at that concept paper, you'll find substantially the same metric that Dr. Cortright is talking about, but you'll also see some of the problems with the data and some of the variations from region to region in the percentage of travel that's included in the data set that we have right now. So we are trying to incorporate this metric. The problem is the data are not there yet to provide us with a comfort level. I think, when I see a finding that Nashville and Birmingham and Oklahoma City have the worst traffic problems, and Chicago, New York, and Miami have the least traffic problems, I got phone calls from the media in all of those places, and they had difficulty understanding what it was they were seeing, because I didn't match up with anything that their readers were telling them. I think that's a component of this is a reality check. I certainly agree that we need to try to convince people of the effect of distance, of the effect of their solutions. I'm very much okay with that, and again, we're trying to incorporate this measure. Again, we started a year before the critique came out in developing the measures, but I think more dialogue is needed about the data. For example, the comparison that Dr. Cortright showed with INRIX data, where all of the data points were on one side of the line. Well, that's true, but if you ask INRIX, figure out what it is they did, essentially every mile of freeway gets the same weight in the INRIX calculation, because they didn't do this mapping of the volume and the speed. So a mile of freeway with 50,000 cars gets the same weight as a mile of freeway with 250,000 cars. Well, what do we suppose about a mile of freeway that's operating with 50,000 cars? It's probably not very congested. A mile with 250,000 cars, that's probably very congested. So in our weighting scheme, the 250,000 would get 5 times the weight of the 50,000. That would tend to push some of those points back down towards the line. Again, it's understanding the data, understanding the calculations behind the data, but I certainly agree that we need to do a good job of communicating the results to the public.
Let's start here.
First of all, just a question to confirm wasn't completely clear. The universe of your survey, the universe that you're talking about, is all trips in the region, not just car trips. or is it?
The data set we have is road-based.
So you're just looking at vehicular.
And just looking at freeways and major and minor arterials. We don't go down to collectors and locals.
Okay, and you're just looking at the movement of people in cars.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I guess my additional comment is that I think that there's, well, to some extent, you've talked past each other. I think that the core, there's a core issue here which has something to do with the ability to relate these numbers to my human experience living in a particular city. And the experience of like the people the reporters hear from in the city who don't know about the average experience in their city, they know about their experience in the city. Yeah. And I wonder if adding up total hours of delay without thinking about sort of whose delay is that? And are in fact more and more people in the city experiencing less delay and a few people are experiencing a lot more? Maybe the core of what's misleading. As people do densify inner cities, more and more people are disappearing from your database, taking transit more, walking more, cycling
sure.
more, and thus falling out of that universe in a way that becomes potentially really, that makes the sound bites very dangerous.
But that would make the numbers go down too. Our commuter number is
right.
Everybody in the region.
Your commuter number is everybody.
Yeah.
Okay. But I guess I'm curious about whether between you, as you put your heads together about this, there are ways to make these metrics a little bit more related to the actual human experience of the city.
I think that really comes down to doing that at a region level. I think having an idea of what the trends are is important. That's sort of what we do. You can think our niche is the second slide in everybody's presentation. Mm-hmm. Okay, that doesn't get to your level of detail. It doesn't get to the solution set that we want to. It characterizes the problem. It characterizes how much worse the problem's getting, or better because of what we've done. It is an element that you can use in the planning process. It's not the way you make decisions. And to my knowledge, nobody makes decisions based on our data.
Just in terms of the soundbite, though, because a lot of your argument was actually about soundbite outcomes of technical work. That isn't you can't be entirely responsible for the soundbites and the rest of the work. But I wonder how much better this whole debate would be if TTI, whenever you presented this data, presented for each city the average trip length very clearly so that people could see that factor when how it interacts with the other things you're reporting. Because it is clearly a part of the story that a soundbite extraction is going to miss and create that kind of confusion. But it sounds to me like it's almost a presentation question more than a technical question.
Average, so I value that idea. I'm wondering how we don't get that statistic also lumped into the vast milieu of average numbers. You know, the average trip length that I think you're asking for is sort of what's the average trip length inside the loop, outside the beltway. You know that.
No, if you were comparing Nashville with Portland, it would say very clearly, wait a minute, Portland's got something going here. The metro areas are about the same population, but people in Portland are going way shorter distances.
And I think you can. I mean, the people in Portland know that.
Right.
The people in Portland who read our report know that.
I disagree. I mean, the transportation people in Portland probably know what the numbers are, but you wouldn't know it from reading your report because it's not in the report. And I think your point is exactly right. We should present both of those pieces of information. Earlier, you alluded to the fact, Tim, that you didn't think the trip data or the trip length data was as robust. It's an identity essentially. I mean, you can't estimate the hours of delay without knowing the trip length. So it's no more nor less robust.
But the average trip length for an individual isn't in our data.
You're right, but I'm saying for a metropolitan area, which is what the gentleman was saying. And the other thing I'd say is, and again, I think your point is exactly right. How do we reconcile this with individual people's experiences? That's a very good point. It's one of the reasons why we went to the National Household Transportation Survey, and I'm a bit baffled by your claim, Tim, that congestion has gotten a lot worse, but after we adjust for trip distances it doesn't show up in the length of time that people say it's taking to commute. If it's getting dramatic,
20% of the peak period drivers?
yeah, but what you're saying is congestion is a really horrible problem, but it's not making the 20% of the peak period travelers' travel time worse. You're saying
It's because they're changing where they live and where they work.
No,
I think
after
it's
we
a
control
fairly
for
well-known phenomenon.
But you're saying, okay, so even though it's many more hours, the total number of hours that have been lost to congestion have more than doubled in the last 20 years. We can't see any of it in the NHTS?
That's because you're looking at individuals who make different trip decisions, individuals who change where they live and where they work. So those trip ends are moving around.
Absolutely.
Okay, but the fact that congestion is a different element, it's a facility-based element, it's what shows up as, the congested roads are much longer. The areas of congestion are much greater.
Yeah, I just don't, it's hard for me to reconcile the average number of hours of delay per person have doubled, and yet commute trips, which are the biggest single chunk of trips in the peak hour, haven't gotten any longer. I just can't reconcile those two.
Gary.
In all fairness, Sam had his hand up a half a second before me. Well, this has been an enlightening discussion for me because for years I've been using the TTI numbers to condemn the obsession with investment in this country in high-speed mobility. But I've been using them differently than the way the CEO for cities have been using them. So maybe you're right; they are both talking about each other. I haven't been comparing Nashville to Portland. I've been comparing, and when I go into an urban area, your data from 1982 to your data in 2009, and there the numbers are astonishing. Places like that are post-World War II development, like Colorado Springs and Oklahoma City and so on, the numbers are 400 or 500% increase in congestion compared to places like New York City, where maybe only 80%. So you can begin to make the case that, the case that the CEO of cities are trying to make, which is the cities that have the older networks and the infrastructure and the transit are surviving better. So maybe a lot of this gets solved by changing the name of the report, because having listened to this, it's not an urban mobility report. It's a report on the rate of congestion increase for the cars on the roadways. And I think that's an important piece of data that we need if we use it right. But I also agree with the CEO for cities that other people, well, I never thought about the fact that somebody's going to take it and try to make a case for more and more money simply for highways as opposed to, and also anti-urbanism. So yeah, I think you need to continue on doing this, but properly frame it so that it's not an urban mobility report. It's a piece of the picture, and I think you almost need to put these caveats on these things so that the Wall Street Journal and other folks that want to promote highway building don't draw those conclusions.
I think I know I am never surprised at how our report gets used or misused. I have been doing this for a long time, and it doesn't matter. The caveats really, in some sense, get lost for the people who don't read the report. For the people who want to push a solution, there's nothing we can do to keep them from pushing a solution. And people from all points of the spectrum have used our report to prove their point.
Tim, I don't know if I agree with that, because I mean, and 3
I
days ago I would have thought differently. But having gone into your report dozens of times, those caveats are buried in there somewhere. And so I really do think perhaps the CEO for cities has a point here that, and maybe this is what you're being paid for by USDOT too. Maybe this is beyond the scope of what you're doing. Maybe you're only told to measure a slice of this urban mobility.
We're not told to do anything.
Those caveats, shouldn't be buried on page 56 in fine print like they are in the newspaper when they retract a story. They really need to be way up front. That this is a report simply of a small slice of the mobility.
Can I just dive in here, because and I take Tim absolutely his word here. I don't disbelieve him, and I'm not alleging there's a conspiracy. I'm not using the conspiracy word here. I think any piece of work that is the product of one person or one institution is going to be colored by whatever their perceptions are. Our work is, your work is, and that's why I would argue that we need to open up this process and engage and have a real good debate about what the appropriate set of metrics are, and that we put them out there, you know, as a group and do it in a, you know, in a collegial way. But at this point, it's, you know, like you said, you put this report out, you know exactly how it's used every year. It's no big surprise.
Go ahead, sir.
Just to finish, if we can work together to figure out what caveat you want us to put in, I'm open to that.
I'll let you talk to the guy next to you. He's paid to do that.
My name's Sam Teskin from C.H. Hill, and I'm thinking that now back to the amazing talk we heard on Wednesday night from Professor Coleman. And he had a slide up there which I'll sort of metaphorically call the Russian nested dolls. You know, he said, you know, we've got ways of thinking about landscape, and every time we look at a piece of the landscape, we can open it up and find a bunch more pieces inside that, and we can open it up and find a bunch more pieces inside that. And I think that's a wonderful metaphor for the challenge that we're talking about tonight, which is what do you see in data? You know, what do you see in data? You know, statistics never lie, but liars use statistics. We all say this all the time. I mean, I could parse stories listening to the statistics you put up there tonight and say, are shorter trips really a measure of compact cities, or are they a measure of jobs that are decentralized from the city centers out to the suburbs? And is that really the same thing, or is that a different thing? And we could argue about this forever. But I still see a lot of truth in both your positions, and so that little editorial aside, I actually have a question I want to ask, which is if you were asked to describe a small number of ideal transportation statistics that you would equate or want to use to measure livability, what would they be? Because that's a buzzword next to our three agencies at the federal level, partnerships, and DOT secretaries. Everybody's using this word. We'll be tired of it in 2 years, but we're not yet, you know. So what would each of you say would be, I'll say, 1 to 3 favorite measures of livability vis-a-vis transportation and statistics?
One thing that I've thought about is the previous session, the housing and transportation cost. In my head, the livability should also include school cost, because I think if you look at why people are making decisions that they are, it's my son is close to getting out of college. While he was in school, I was really concerned about what the quality of schools were, and I live in a small town. Friends of mine who live in big cities, moved out of their cool apartment that was right next to the baseball stadium and right near the basketball arena when they had kids, because they couldn't see spending the money to send their kids to private school, and they didn't like the public schools, so they moved to the suburbs. I think we got to include schools into our models, into our predictive tools, because that's what people are making their decisions on. So I'd make that pitch.
I think generally we should be moving away from measures of mobility. As an economist, transportation is a transaction cost. It's a cost we incur to get other stuff. And we should be thinking instead of mobility, we ought to be focusing on accessibility. How easily can people get the things they want, and that includes schools. I think a really exciting measure that's out there is walk score. Not because it's perfect, but because it's ubiquitous, it's free, and it's pretty darn illuminating in terms of teasing out differences in accessibility among places. I think there's a lot more that can be done with that type of measure to think about the way urban systems function. And on the schools, I agree with the schools. That's clearly a factor, but it's tragic that we are prompted to spend more and more money on our transportation system instead of fixing our schools. And again, I'm with CEOs for cities, and our agenda is how do we make our cities work better, and building a bigger transportation system so people can travel further and be easier to get to the good schools is not, I think in our view, a sustainable solution to that problem.
Here's a gentleman in the back. You had a comment or question?
Well, I had a comment about, I might have already answered, but I'm thinking about how I'm not really counting in the mobility report, because I live in San Francisco, I work in Oakland, and I take part, and I don't see any congestion. It takes me 18 minutes every day to get to the same point. So I'm not sure how that fits in, but it just seems like something that should be taken into account. You know, these cities, these larger cities with massive congestion, according to the indices, some people don't see it because they have alternatives. So.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we'd like to do is try to incorporate, if you look at the papers on our website, we're looking at a way to, how do we incorporate the transit system, the performance of the transit system into that measurement system? How do we look at walk and bike and work at home trips that also do the same, have the same experience of, at least some of them, that they don't have congestion either. So I think that's some areas, that especially as we get better data sets, better data sources, we can look into, we as a profession.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering if you could educate me a little bit more on TTI's history and where your funding comes from and sort of what your mission is. I guess I'm just curious why an agency in Texas, which is obviously a petroleum-oriented state, is making these very profound decisions and statistical analysis of our transportation system when we clearly demonstrated over the last 50 years that building more roads is not really solving our urban problems.
Oh, okay, so let's be clear. I don't think that solving roads alone, building roads alone solves the problem, okay?
Have you guys ever recommended not building roads?
Absolutely.
So where's your funding?
Okay, so TTI is about 600 professional staff and students. We're a state agency of the state of Texas. We get 93% of our funding from contract research, combination of national research programs, studies with states, sponsored by states, metropolitan planning organizations. The Texas Department of Transportation is about half of our funding in probably 150 different research efforts on any given year from those other sources.
Grants?
We don't do many grants. We have a lot of contracts. People
What
who
does that mean?
a grant in my academic world, a grant pays me to think about stuff and maybe tell somebody. A contract is here's what I promised to do, and here's the deliverables, and here's the.
So these are private people paying you money to do studies?
We have very little private money. We do some private testing
So who's paying you to do these studies?
Trinity Industries pays us to develop roadside safety equipment to keep people from killing themselves. Pavement manufacturers in South America pay us to develop quicker, cheaper pavement mixes.
These are road contractors.
Sure, yeah. The University Transportation Center for Mobility is one of the many university centers that are funded in the transportation legislation. They provide a substantial part of the funding. We also get funding from the American Road Transportation Builders Association and the American Public Transit Association. They also contribute money. TTI does work in a range of different specialties. Our piece is pretty small.
You mentioned DOT funding earlier. What percentage of that is your total funding?
US DOT?
Yeah.
Probably 10%. Keep in mind, I'm about 3 levels down in the organization, and on some level, I really don't care what everybody else does, so I don't know those statistics, but I think our US DOT funding is relatively small.
But not for the urban mobility report. Right?
We don't get any money from US DOT for the urban mobility report.
Not correct.
Well, okay, yeah, the University Transportation Center gets money from US DOT, yeah.
I mean, but isn't
But
isn't
US DOT
5%
is told.
of the urban mobility report paid for the federal transportation funds in your overall program of 600 people?
Say that again.
I'm surmising that a much higher percentage of the actual urban mobility report is being paid for by federal transportation funds than the entire TTI program of 600 people.
Are you counting the money that USDOT is told to give to the University Transportation Center for Mobility, and then they give us a little? I mean, we are one of 15 projects within their program. You're counting that as federal?
Yeah.
Okay. Because it's, we're not working for the feds in that case, and that's what I thought your question was.
I'm just going to say, full disclosure, CEO is a membership organization of a couple of dozen large cities around the country and is funded by foundations, and our particular project was funded by the Rockefeller Foundation.
Let's take the two last comments.
I really want to just pick up on what Jeff Wood said about feeling excluded from the whole scope of the mobility study. And I think that any tension between much of the tension between TTI and the whole sort of urbanist world, much of that might be drained out by calling it something like the urban traffic or urban congestion report, if that's what it really is. Because when it's called the urban mobility report, you appear to be claiming to know about all the mobility in cities, and yet you seem to be talking mostly about traffic. And that seems, I think, to be, when it comes to the optics of TTI, that, and engaging a lot with urbanists and various kinds of people who are mostly focused on on sustainable urbanism and walkable bicycle spaces, that's how you get the reputation of being only interested in cars. And of course, it's the nature of the way the newspapers pick up on that and talk about congestion as though congestion were the story of urban mobility. But we know it's not, and so I think there's an optical problem with just the name. Or else with, as you said, finding a way to expand the scope so that it's really about that. That is in many ways the sort of real problem here, as near as I can.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I just want to make a general comment. I'm actually on the UTCM board. They reviews things that come in. The way TTI generally works, TTI started off as a group of faculty members in civil engineering at Texas A&M that branched off and became full-time researchers. And they compete for branch just like academics do. In fact, we on the academic side often grumble because TTI can put together stronger and better teams than we can, and they blows out of the water on proposals. I mean, they're competing at a legitimate academic level. Now, on the UTCM side, where money for this comes from, Tim keeps winning money for this because he keeps putting in really good proposals that say we're going to refine this and include better detailed data that better accurately captures what's going on in the transportation system. And performance measures in general, I mean, I feel like a lot of the CNU, TTI, bumping heads here is about what performance measures do. I mean, they're just an indicator of how a system performs. They're not objective per se. They're sort of one aspect of a system, right? You can't treat them as objective. They represent a particular set of values. So the question is, what are the set of values we want to have? The CEO for cities brings a very valid point to the discussion, which is we do want to value multiple modes of transportation within the city. TTI captures highway travel and its effects, but they're getting better and better and better about capturing multimodal dimensions. And a lot of the grants that's been coming through has been trying to capture this. I believe you've got a transit equivalency index that's been included in recently. These sorts of things that are intended to capture this. But performance measures are a tool we can use to advocate for or against different types of solutions. I mean, it's cool actually that you're starting to have these different dimensions of the discussion come together, and that at 10 o'clock at night, people care about how performance measures are operationalized. And there are drinks to be had.
It's well after 10 o'clock at night, and I applaud you all for being here, but I think you're here because it's a reflection that this discussion about congestion, about traffic, is one of the most important things that we can discuss at CNU. Because that is what is driving a lot of the problems that we have about trying to remake cities. So I'm going to put in a plug for something that is half-baked as of yet. Don't look at me like that, Lucy. We are planning a transportation summit for Burlington, Vermont, next fall of next year. And as I see it right now, I think this issue of finding better ways to talk about what is important to measure in terms of transportation. And some of the other things that we do, like how we model transportation, that's going to be the theme of the meeting. So I would like to invite you all to think about coming to Burlington in the fall, in leaf peeping season, so that we can work on these issues. And I would again like to thank Tim and Joe for being here, and I'm sure they will be glad to talk